Al-Qaeda members are older on the average than other members of the jihad. They are also likely to be better educated. The leadership is mostly skilled. The members who actually do the attacks tend to be less skilled. But in any event, they're more skilled than our other members of the jihad. And the plurality among those who are skilled is that of engineer. Engineer is the largest category within the Al-Qaeda movement, an occupation, followed by medical doctor. In terms of nationality, Al-Qaeda itself is an expatriate movement. That is, it's a diaspora movement, like many revolutionary movements, including the Palestinian movement, the IRA, formed initially in the diaspora, not in the countries of origin. The other movements, of course, tend to be much more localized and national. In terms of income, Al-Qaeda also has a higher average income than these other movements. And in terms of marital status, most are married. You can chuck the testosterone theory about the virgins, by the way. I mean, no one dies for virgins. That's a sexual fantasy that the West has, our politicians and pundits. But at least within that part of the world, I've never come up, and I interview these guys all the time, never come up with anybody who was remotely interested in dying for virgins. Probably interested in getting away from sex. The new wave of Takfiri terrorism is very different. The new wave, it tends to be much more marginalized in their societies, poor, less educated, and much more likely to be involved with criminal networks. And that's a fairly recent phenomenon. As far as Al-Qaeda itself, there used to be about 1,000 members of Al-Qaeda, mostly built around this Egyptian core of Takfiris. There are maybe 100 left. That's a reduction by an order of magnitude. Most of them are in Waziristan. There are about a dozen small mobile camps with about 6 people in each one and a trainer, sometimes an assistant trainer. The largest one is a place called Mir Ali in northern Waziristan. Its commander is a guy named Abu Ubaid al-Masri, who was the former Al-Qaeda representative for Nuristan. And, of course, there were openings in Al-Qaeda after the United States attack, and he filled up one of those openings. And he's a really dangerous guy. The only really significant Al-Qaeda plot since the bombings in Tunisia in 2002 has been the airplane plot, which is why you have to put your toilet kits in plastic containers. That was a very serious plot. They were going to blow up 20 airliners over the Atlantic. And it came close to fruition. But that's the only one. There are a couple of other smaller ones in places like Copenhagen that have existed. But for the most part, there are very few true Al-Qaeda plots. None have been successful since 2002. Most of the Al-Qaeda people don't know who the new terrorists are, couldn't communicate with them even if they did know. Let me just give you an idea of what terrorist networks are like in terms of trying to join up with Al-Qaeda. Most terrorists are caught trying to link up with Al-Qaeda. In fact, trying to link up with something that pretty much doesn't exist anymore. Young people from all over try to get to Afghanistan and Pakistan to make their way into Waziristan or other parts of the border or the frontier areas to get training. And they find that most of the people who are waiting to accept them are intelligence agents from the Pakistani authorities or even American agents. Some of them get there through a sort of Silk Road. That is, they know somebody who knows someone who may have had a relative who may have been in a training camp one day, and they pay their own way. The people who did the crevice plot, for example, the plot to blow up Heathrow Airlines, which was headlined in the Boston Globe and the New York Times and Le Monde as Al-Qaeda plot foiled, were actually a bunch of friends who decided to go and do something. They paid 3,500 euros to get an apartment. They finally found a trainer who was a friend of a relative who trained them. They thought they were going to go to Kashmir, where the action was. And the trainer said, why don't you do something back where you come from? And so they went back home. And if you look at their emails, they're sort of ridiculous. One would say, how much of the ammonium nitrate was I supposed to mix? I forgot what they told us. And that's about the level at which these plots are carried out. The reason that these organizations are hitched up to criminal organizations now is because the United States has been largely successful at stopping large-scale money transfers between these groups. So you go where the money can be found. And where can money be found that isn't traceable? In criminal networks. It's not that the jihadis search for the criminals. It's just that that's where the networks exist, where they can ride piggyback and get the sorts of ammunition and arms and funds they need to do the actions they want to do. They're mostly self-mobilized, self-generating guys who sit around, talk, schmooze, and decide they want to do something in life. There are no recruiters to Al-Qaeda. There's never has been any recruiters to Al-Qaeda. There's no recruiter who's gone to Europe. There are no recruiters who go to Saudi Arabia. Al-Qaeda used to be like a funding agency, like the NSF or the NIH. You'd put in an application. Al-Qaeda would accept maybe 15 to 20%. If they thought it was good, they'd give you some money, give you some advice, maybe try to find a suicide bomber or two for you. But that was basically the extent of the involvement. A good case is the Hamburg plotters, Muhammad Atta and his friends. We spent a lot of time with their friends, their neighbors, their family. Now, why did these guys self-radicalize? Well, in the 1990s, they were students at a technical university in the Hamburg suburb of Harburg. The interesting thing about them was they were all Middle Easterners. That means they were doubly alienated. All the others were either German, Christians, or Turkish and Moroccan Muslims. So these were the Middle Eastern Muslims who got together. They also broke the Al-Qaeda pattern. They were bachelors. They started talking to one another, eating with one another, getting their haircuts with one another, praying with one another, and then they started to live together. The neighbors described 20 mattresses. The place stunk because, like many takfiri, people trying to emulate the Prophet and his friends as they withdrew from Mecca to Medina, they would take in everybody from the neighborhood, anybody who was passing through, and they'd start self-radicalizing together. Then they wanted to do something. Islam was under attack everywhere. They wanted to go to Chechnya. Didn't work out. They tried to go to Kosovo. The Albanians said, get lost. And they were lost themselves about what they do. Someone came up with an idea, why don't you go to Afghanistan, find out what's going on. They eventually made their way to Afghanistan, where Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who himself had just come into, basically, Al-Qaeda, because his proposal had been accepted by bin Laden and some of the others to blow up something in the United States, a sort of rehashed plot that he had tried out in the early 1990s. And basically he said, hey boss, look what we got. We got Europeans who don't need visas to get into the United States, who can speak English, who can mix easily in European American society. Let's use them. So again, the idea is, Al-Qaeda didn't go looking for them. They went looking for Al-Qaeda. Even the sort of plot of Al-Qaeda was not something that came from any kind of command and control network. It's now taking place over the internet. Okay? You've got 3 high school buddies in Canada, a few more in the United States, a couple of guys in Denmark and Sweden, a guy sitting in his basement calls himself Irhabi 007, Terrorist 007. None of these guys had met each other. I mean, the high school buddies knew one another, friends in America knew one another. But over the internet, they developed a chat room. They decided they're going to blow up the Canadian Parliament. They're going to blow up the American Embassy in Bosnia, of all places. And you know what? They actually get together for the first time at the airport in Bosnia, where intelligence authorities had been following them. And they're arrested with suicide belts, AK-47s, and thousands of rounds of ammunition. What that tells you is anybody can become a terrorist anytime, any place today. You don't need recruiters. You never did. The new wave of terrorism is about youth culture. Okay? It's not about the Quran. Never was about the Quran. About 70% of the people who join the jihad are born again. They have no formal religious education. They don't even come from religious families. They come late in life and they have very little knowledge or even interest in the Quran itself. Again, the message from where I've been, jungles of remote islands in Sulawesi or Borneo to Morocco or London or the suburbs of Paris is Islam's under attack. We've got to do something. It's a flat message in a fairly flat world. Now, how do you change youth culture? That's our big problem. Not bombing these people and hammering it, and spreading mercury all over the place. How do you deal with young people in search of something greater than themselves? And what I'm going to show you now is that no one's really done any control studies. But when you look at controls, what you find is tens of millions of people are sympathetic to the jihad and